I never thought I'd be that girl who settled, the one who picks the safe option because she's tired of the drama. But here I am, Samatha, 32, sitting in my perfectly adequate house in suburban Michigan, thinking about how I ended up marrying the human equivalent of an ochre wall. Ethan. Don't get me wrong, Ethan isn't terrible, he's just Ethan. The first time I saw him was at Chloe's housewarming party. He was this tall, slightly lanky guy in a meticulously ironed shirt who kept reorganizing the snack table to optimize the flow. That should have been my first clue. A flashing neon sign, really. My friends, ever the optimists, pointed him out. He's an engineer, Samatha, very practical. Practical. That word would come to haunt me. He asked for my number by saying he'd like to allocate some time to get to know me better. I actually thought it was cute back then. A quirky charm, a refreshing change. Funny how things change, isn't it? Especially after the wild ride I'd had with Julian. Julian. Ah, Julian. He was this absolutely gorgeous contractor, all raw passion and untamed charisma. He could light up a room just by walking in, a storm of spontaneity and adventure. With Julian, every day was an unpredictable journey, a passionate embrace followed by a fiery argument, or a surprise weekend getaway to the coast that involved sleeping under the stars and eating street food. He was everything I thought a real man should be. He lived by instinct, not by schedule. But he also had this nasty habit of disappearing for days, of flirting with anything that moved, leaving me to pick up the emotional pieces. He was a thrill, a magnificent, beautiful disaster, and I was utterly, devastatingly drawn to him. After Julian, Ethan felt like a safe harbor, a quiet, unassuming port after navigating a treacherous sea. Ethan, who texted back within minutes, not days. Ethan, who always showed up exactly when he said he would, not fashionably late or, worse, not at all. Ethan, who looked at me like I hung the moon, like I was the most fascinating creature he'd ever encountered. It was comforting, almost intoxicating, in its predictability. Our first date was at this little cafe, and he'd already scoped out the optimal table for conversation acoustics. I'm not kidding. He even had these little note cards with pre-planned conversation topics, just in case things got awkward. My inner alarm bells, dulled by Julian's chaos, barely registered. Looking back, I should have run right then, sprinted out of that cafe and never looked back. But I was 29. The clock was ticking, a relentless rhythm in my ears. Everyone, my mother, my well-meaning friends, even the glossy magazines, kept telling me I needed to get serious about finding someone, about settling down. The thing about Ethan is that he's reliable. Like a Toyota Camry or store-brand cereal. He remembers birthdays, plans ahead for anniversaries, and actually listens when I talk. He'd meticulously research the perfect gift, ensuring it had the best utility-to-cost ratio. He'd make sure our grocery list was color-coded and get visibly anxious if we deviated from our carefully constructed meal plan. He was a spreadsheet come to life, a perfectly organized filing cabinet in human form. During our entire courtship, he never once just grabbed me and kissed me passionately, spontaneously. Everything was planned, calculated, safe. When he proposed after 18 months of dating right on schedule, according to his relationship timeline, which I later discovered was an actual, physical document it was with this modest ring, he'd picked it because it had the best quality to price ratio. He'd set up this whole elaborate scenario at a local park, complete with a spreadsheet showing why we were compatible. I'm not even joking. There was a PowerPoint presentation involved, detailing our shared values, our complementary strengths, our projected financial stability. My friends, bless their naive hearts, thought it was adorable, so thoughtful. I smiled. I said yes. Because, well, what else was I supposed to do? I was pushing 30. Ethan was stable, employed, and actually wanted to commit. He was a safe bet, a logical progression from the volatile uncertainty of Julian. I convinced myself this was what growing up looked like. This was maturity. This was choosing peace over passion. During our engagement, the little things started piling up, like tiny, irritating pebbles in my shoe. He'd text me asking permission to buy new work shoes, detailing the pros and cons of different brands. He'd practice his conversations with my dad before actually having them, rehearsing potential questions and optimal responses. He once spent 3 hours researching the perfect temperature to serve wine at our engagement party. Who does that? It was endearing at first, then peculiar, then downright maddening. It felt like living with a perpetual project manager, every aspect of life meticulously scrutinized and optimized. The wedding was exactly what Ethan wanted. Small, practical, budget, conscious. I'd always dreamed of something more spectacular, a fairy tale, a grand romantic gesture. But Ethan had this whole presentation about wedding debt statistics and long-term financial planning. It was hard to argue with facts and figures, even if my heart yearned for something illogical and beautiful. He cried during our vows, which should have been sweet, touching, deeply romantic. But all I could think about was how Julian would have probably winked at me instead, a mischievous sparkle in his eyes, making me weak in the knees. Ethan's tears felt calculated, like he'd read somewhere that grooms crying was a sign of emotional depth. My friends kept telling me how lucky I was. He's so thoughtful, they'd say. He really thinks everything through. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Another way is that he's about as spontaneous as a tax return. Even our honeymoon was planned down to the minute. Lucas had a literal itinerary printed out, laminated, with buffer time built in for spontaneous activities. I'm not making this up. I kept telling myself that marriage would change him, that somehow, magically, Ethan would develop that natural confidence I found so attractive in other men. That maybe one day he'd just come home from work, pick me up, and carry me to the bedroom without first checking if it aligned with our weekly schedule. I clung to that hope, a fragile, desperate thing, but as the weeks bled into months, the beige continued to seep into every corner of our lives, slowly, relentlessly, suffocating the last vestiges of the vibrant, passionate girl I used to be. You know what's really messed up? Ethan actually tries. He genuinely wants to make me happy. When I mentioned once, offhandedly, that I missed going dancing like I used to, he spent 2 weeks taking online dance lessons. He researched optimal footwork, watched countless YouTube tutorials, and even sketched out diagrams. Then he surprised me with a date night. It was sweet, in a clinical sort of way. But watching him count steps under his breath, his brow furrowed in concentration, apologizing every time he made a mistake, just made me want to scream. It felt less like a romantic gesture and more like a meticulously executed project. I look at our wedding photos sometimes, displayed in the geometrically perfect arrangement Ethan insisted on. There he is, crying as I walk down the aisle, while I'm smiling that tight smile that says, "This is fine. This is what growing up looks like." My mom keeps saying I hit the jackpot with Ethan. "He's so stable," she'd say. "He'll make such a good father." And she's probably right. He'd probably have spreadsheets for diaper changes and a 6-step flowchart for optimal burping techniques. It's almost comical, if it weren't so soul-crushingly real. The worst part is that Ethan knows. Not everything, but enough. He sees how I roll my eyes when he starts talking about efficiency metrics at his job, describing in excruciating detail how he streamlined a particularly complex workflow. He notices when I get quiet, my gaze drifting, after running into Julian at the grocery store, looking all rugged and spontaneous with his messy hair and worn leather jacket, a 5 o'clock shadow that hinted at adventure. And when Ethan senses my withdrawal, he just tries harder, which makes it all so much worse. Because how do you tell someone that their best qualities, their reliability, their thoughtfulness, their meticulous planning, are exactly what make them so insufferable to you? How do you explain to your husband that you married him because you thought it was time to grow up, not because he made your heart race? How do you articulate that his efforts to make you happy, so earnest and well-intentioned, feel like another item on a to-do list, another box to check? Here I am, 3 years into marriage with a man who organizes the spice rack alphabetically and creates pivot tables for our monthly budget. A man who asks me if I'm comfortable with the thermostat temperature and if I'd prefer the blue pillowcases or the gray ones for optimal sleep hygiene. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what life would have been like if I'd waited for a real man. Someone who doesn't need a proper pros and cons list to decide what to order for dinner. Someone who could just be. I tried, in my own clumsy way, to man him up. When we watched movies and he got emotional, tearing up at a particularly poignant scene, I'd tell him, "Real men don't cry at fictional characters, Ethan." Or when he'd ask me what I wanted for dinner for the millionth time, agonizing over the decision, I'd snap, "Just make a decision for once." But he'd just get this hurt look on his face, a wounded puppy dog expression, and say, "I value your input, Samatha. My input on takeout." It was infuriating. Last week, we ran into my ex, Julian, at the home improvement store. Ethan was there, buying supplies for his precious pottery hobby, a measuring tape in hand, comparing the dimensions of different shelving units for his craft corner. Julian was there buying actual construction supplies for actual man's work. Planks of wood, bags of cement, looking a bit sweaty, and genuinely productive. The contrast was painful, stark, undeniable. Julian gave me this knowing look, a flicker of the old spark, and I felt my stomach flip. He never needed a measuring tape. He just knew things, did things, made decisions. Meanwhile, Ethan was calculating the square footage of shelf space like he was solving a complex mathematical problem. That night, I made the mistake of mentioning how nice it was to see Julian. Ethan, being Ethan, asked if I wanted to invite him and his girlfriend over for dinner. Who does that? What kind of man invites his wife's ex over for dinner? Especially an ex who still stirred something deep inside his wife. I told him, "Normal people don't do that, Ethan." He responded by suggesting we look up social etiquette guidelines for interacting with exes. I'm not kidding. He wanted to research it, to find the optimal protocol for an emotionally charged situation. Sometimes I catch him practicing power poses in the bathroom mirror before work meetings. He'd read in some self-help book that it boosts confidence. All it does is remind me that my husband needs WikiHow to teach him how to be a man. The other day, he came home all excited because he successfully implemented an assertiveness technique during a meeting. Turns out, he just managed to disagree with someone without apologizing 10 times afterward. And he wanted to celebrate. Actually celebrate, with sparkling cider, because he doesn't drink on weeknights. It affects sleep quality, apparently. The cumulative effect of these meticulously planned, emotionally detached actions was slowly eroding my love, replacing it with a creeping resentment. Looking back, I guess I should have seen the dinner party disaster coming. It was an inevitable climax to years of simmering resentment. Ethan had spent a week planning it, down to calculating the optimal number of appetizers per person. He even created a seating chart based on conversational compatibility. I'd been day drinking with Chloe and the girls beforehand, just to cope with the idea of another one of his overplanned social events. Everything was going fine, I guess, in that bland, predictable way Ethan orchestrated, until our neighbor, Owen, Chloe's husband, started talking about the new regulations at the manufacturing plant. Owen is one of those guys who actually speaks his mind, you know, a normal person. He was saying how the new safety protocols were overkill, just more red tape making everything slower, less efficient. Ethan, being Ethan, couldn't help himself. He started in with his statistics and safety incident reports, speaking in that soft, diplomatic voice he uses when he's trying to be assertive. Owen wasn't having it. He cut Ethan off, saying something like, "Sometimes you just gotta get the job done. Protocols or not, you know?" And you know what my husband did? Instead of standing his ground, instead of defending his perspective with the conviction I secretly craved, he backed down. He gave this little nervous laugh and said, "Well, everyone's entitled to their perspective." Then he got up to refill the cheese plate, like some kind of caterer at his own dinner party. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was years of watching him fold like a cheap lawn chair every time someone challenged him. But something in me just snapped. "This is exactly why I married you." I heard myself saying, the words sharp, cutting through the polite hum of conversation. The room got quiet, a sudden, stunned silence. Because all the real men weren't available. You could have heard a pin drop. Ethan froze, cheese plate in hand, with that stupid, surprised expression he gets when something doesn't go according to his precious plans. I should have stopped there, I know. But once the dam broke, everything just came pouring out, a torrent of years of suppressed frustration and disappointment. "You want to know what real men do, Ethan?" I continued, my voice rising, trembling with a mixture of anger and a strange, almost exhilarating freedom. "They don't spend an hour researching the perfect wine pairing for lasagna. They don't make spreadsheets for date night ideas. They definitely don't cry during their wedding vows, or ask for directions, or let people walk all over them at work. He just stood there, taking it. Which only made me even angrier. You know what's worse than having a husband who color codes the spice rack? Having one who doesn't even defend himself when his wife is calling him out in front of everyone. Our guests were staring at their plates, at their wine glasses, anywhere but at us. Classic Ethan. He started gathering empty glasses, his hands shaking slightly, as if tidying up could somehow make this moment disappear. You want to know something else? I was on a roll now, beyond caring about propriety or embarrassment. I've been talking to Julian again. Nothing physical, I added, almost as an afterthought, though the words felt like a punch, but at least he knows how to take charge of a situation. At least he doesn't need a self-help book to teach him how to be a man. Ethan finally stopped his nervous cleaning. He looked at me, then at our mortified guests, and said, in that infuriatingly calm voice of his, I think maybe we should continue this conversation in private. Now. Private? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Now you want privacy? Where's this backbone when it actually matters? When Owen's walking all over you about safety protocols? When your boss passes you over for promotions because you're too nice? Someone, I think it was Chloe, tried to suggest they should leave. Ethan, ever the perfect host, started apologizing to everyone, promising to reschedule. Reschedule? I snapped at him, incredulous. Like this was a meeting that ran overtime? I don't need your permission to tell the truth. Everyone's thinking it. You're so busy trying to be perfect that you forgot how to be real. My voice cracked as I delivered the final, most cruel blow. You know what Julian said when I told him about your pottery hobby? He laughed, Ethan. He actually laughed. Because real men build things, they don't play with clay. The room emptied pretty quickly after that. Our friends, uncomfortable and embarrassed, mumbled their excuses and fled, leaving a silence far heavier than before. Ethan just stood in our dining room, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and his carefully arranged cheese plate, looking lost for the first time. He didn't try to smooth things over or suggest we discuss our feelings, to process the evening's events. He just turned, walked upstairs, and started packing a bag. What are you doing? I demanded, following him, a tremor of fear finally starting to snake through my anger. Taking some time, he said quietly, folding his clothes with military precision. Even in this moment, everything had to be perfectly organized. So you're running away? Real brave, I sneered, trying to sting him. He paused. He actually looked me in the eye for once, a strange, calm resolve in his gaze that I had never seen directed at me. No, Samatha, I'm setting a boundary. Something I should have done a long time ago. I figured he'd be back in a few days. Ethan always came back. Always tried to fix things. That's what he did. Solve problems with his charts and lists and careful planning. But days turned into weeks. And all I got was a text saying he was staying at his brother's place and would be in touch about dividing our assets. Dividing our assets, like we were some business venture being dissolved. Actually, that's exactly what our marriage had been to Ethan, wasn't it? Another project to manage, another system to optimize. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, even as I still clung to my anger. The weeks that followed were a blur of bewildered silence and simmering resentment. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. Just sent polite, formal texts about practical arrangements, who would keep the car, how to handle the mortgage, a detailed inventory of our shared possessions. It was clinical, devoid of emotion, and infuriatingly Ethan. When I swung by his brother's place, ready to have it out with him, to demand an explanation, to force him to confront the mess I thought he had made, he wasn't there. He's at the gym, his brother mumbled, looking uncomfortable. The gym. Not Planet Fitness, but some serious weightlifting place. Ethan, who used to say gyms were inefficient compared to his carefully calibrated home workout routine. The irony stung. Chloe finally took pity on me and filled me in, sensing my desperation. Apparently, Ethan had started therapy. Not couples counseling, just for himself. He needed to work on assertiveness, Samatha, Chloe said, her voice softer than usual, and finding his own voice. My chest tightened. My cruel words about him needing a self-help book, echoed in my ears. He'd even gotten a different position at work. Something about project management where his attention to detail and organizational skills were actually valued, not just tolerated or, in my case, mocked. And he kept up with the pottery. But now, he was selling pieces online. Successfully. He's doing better, Samatha? Chloe told me over coffee, her gaze direct, unwavering. Maybe you should try therapy too. The implication hung heavy in the air, a judgment I couldn't ignore. I tried explaining my side to our friends, carefully editing out the worst parts of what I'd said, softening the edges of my cruelty. But they'd been there at the dinner party. They'd seen how I treated him over the years. The subtle digs, the dismissive eye rolls, the constant comparisons. Even my best friend, Megan, who's always on my side, just shook her head. "You know what your problem is?" she said, her voice laced with a frustration I rarely heard from her. "You confused kindness with weakness. Ethan wasn't weak. He just didn't need to prove anything to anyone, until you made him feel like he had to." Her words were a cold splash of water, jarring in their truth. Then Julian reached out. He'd heard we'd separated, wanted to get drinks, catch up. I agreed, a flicker of the old hope igniting. Maybe I'd been right all along. Maybe this was how things were supposed to go. Maybe the real man was finally available. But you know what? He spent the whole time bragging about his conquests, checking out the waitress, and complaining about his ex-wife. He was still the same volatile, self-centered Julian. When he tried to kiss me in the parking lot, all rough and possessive, a wave of disgust washed over me. It wasn't passion, it was just entitlement. In that moment, the illusion shattered completely, and I realized how wrong I'd been about what makes a real man. It wasn't about the bravado or the unpredictability, it was something far deeper, far more substantial. The worst part? Ethan was actually thriving. His brother posted a video of him at some rock climbing gym, looking different. Not just physically, though apparently those gym sessions were paying off, but in how he carried himself. He wasn't checking his phone for proper climbing techniques or apologizing to the wall. He was just doing it, scaling the wall with a quiet determination, a newfound confidence that radiated from him. I stalked his social media. Okay, I still do. No more daily schedule posts or productivity tips. Instead, there are photos of his pottery, beautifully crafted bowls and vases, each one reflecting his meticulous nature but now imbued with an artistic flair. Photos of his new hiking hobby, breathtaking landscapes he was exploring, casual group shots where he's actually looking at the camera, a genuine smile on his face, instead of worrying about the optimal angle or how his hair looked. He even posted about failing at a climbing route but being proud of trying. The old Ethan would never have admitted failure publicly. It would have been an imperfection, a flaw in his meticulously planned life. This Ethan was different. He was authentic. When we finally met to discuss divorce proceedings, I almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't wearing one of his carefully coordinated outfits, chosen for optimal impression, just jeans and a t-shirt, but he seemed comfortable in his own skin, an ease I had never witnessed during our marriage. He'd grown a beard. Not perfectly groomed like he would have insisted on before, but natural, slightly rugged. His eyes, once full of a subtle anxiety, now held a serene clarity. I tried suggesting couples counseling, hearing myself sound like the overthinking, planning person I used to mock him for being. It was a desperate, belated attempt to cling to the familiar, to something that felt salvageable. But Ethan just smiled. Actually smiled, not that nervous thing he used to do, the polite, practiced smile. It was a genuine, gentle smile, full of a quiet understanding. "I loved you, Samantha," he said, his voice calm, steady, without a hint of anger or bitterness. "But I didn't love who I became trying to be the man you wanted. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done pretending." That conversation messed me up more than I'd like to admit. Here I was, still living in our house with its color-coded closets and perfectly arranged spice rack, a monument to the man I had married. While Ethan was out there, becoming someone new, someone real. Just not the kind of real I'd pushed him to be. The kind of real that had been there all along, beneath the layers of spreadsheets and meticulous planning, waiting to be seen, to be accepted. I found myself missing the stupid things. The little notes with terrible puns. The way he'd research restaurants for hours to find the perfect date night spot. Even the chore chart with its dumb stickers. At least he cared enough to try. At least he was present. At least he was. And I, in my blindness, had pushed him away. Then I saw them together. At the farmer's market? I'd gone to get some overpriced organic tomatoes, trying to cling to some semblance of my old discerning self. And there they were. Ethan and this pixie-like woman with paint-stained fingers, looking at pottery supplies. Ilara, that's her name. She illustrates children's books, according to her Instagram. Yes, I looked her up. Don't judge me. She was teaching him about different glazes, her small, expressive hands gesturing animatedly. And he was actually laughing. Not that nervous, self-conscious laugh he used to do with me, but real, deep laughter that emanated from his core. He looked relaxed, completely at ease, wearing a clay-stained t-shirt and those cargo shorts I used to hate, deeming them unfashionable and impractical for formal occasions. His beard was slightly messy, not meticulously trimmed, and he hadn't styled his hair with the precision he used to obsess over. He was undone, in the most beautiful way. The worst part? When he spotted me, across the bustling market stalls, he didn't get flustered or start apologizing for running into me. He just nodded, said a casual, "Hey, Samantha," and turned back to Alara, his hand resting naturally on her lower back. No calculated movements, no overthinking, no subtle glance to see my reaction. Just being. It was an intimacy I had never truly shared with him, an effortless connection that spoke volumes. I started hearing about them through our mutual friends. How Ethan and Alara did pottery together in his new studio, laughing and creating, the studio floor probably covered in clay dust and happy chaos. How they went climbing, pushing their limits, and didn't care if they failed, celebrating the effort more than the outcome. How she loved his dad jokes and actually encouraged his puns, finding charm in the very things that used to make me cringe. She even helped him set up an Etsy shop for his ceramics. Turns out people loved his precise, perfectly symmetrical bowls. The same attention to detail I used to mock him for was now his signature style, a unique selling point. Chloe told me they took a spontaneous weekend trip to the coast. Ethan, Mr. Plan everything down to the minute. He just packed a bag and went. No itinerary, no research about optimal routes or tourist ratings. When I asked if he'd had an anxiety attack about it, convinced this uncharacteristic spontaneity would unravel him, Chloe just looked at me weird and said, "He's not that person anymore, Samantha." Maybe he never was. Maybe that was just who he thought he had to be for you. Her words, delivered with a quiet kindness, felt like a fresh wound. The thing that really got me, I overheard him at the coffee shop where I like to work sometimes. He was having a business meeting about expanding his pottery business. This slick, aggressive guy in a sharp suit was trying to steamroll him about production quotas and mass manufacturing. And Ethan, the man who once folded like a cheap lawn chair, just calmly said, "That's not the direction I want to take my art." Art. He called it art, not a calculated business venture. When the guy pushed back, condescendingly, Ethan didn't cave or get flustered. He just stood firm, thanked him for his time, and left. He was polite, but utterly resolute. I watched him walk out, a strange pang in my chest. I remembered how I used to wish he'd stand up for himself, how I wanted him to be aggressive, dominant, to fight for his beliefs. Turns out, he could. Just not in the aggressive, confrontational way I thought he needed to. He found his own way of being strong, a quiet, unyielding strength, and I was too busy trying to change him to see it coming. Alara came in right after his meeting. I pretended to be absorbed in my laptop, but I was watching them. She took one look at his face and knew something was up. Instead of trying to fix it or offering solutions like I would have, like the pragmatic problem solver I was, she just squeezed his hand and asked if he wanted to throw some pots. He lit up like I'd never seen during our entire marriage. It wasn't a planned, calculated joy. It was pure, unadulterated delight. That's when it hit me. Alara wasn't trying to make him into anything. She wasn't waiting for him to man up or comparing him to some ideal. She just let him be Ethan. And somehow, paradoxically, that allowed him to become more himself, more confident, more authentic than he ever was with me. My attempts to sculpt him into my ideal of a man had only suffocated the true essence of him. Alara's acceptance, her gentle encouragement, had allowed him to bloom. I didn't expect to see them at Chloe's wedding. I mean, I knew they'd be there. Chloe and Ethan had stayed close friends, another thing that surprised me, a testament to his quiet loyalty, but I wasn't prepared for how it would feel. Ethan was a groomsman, looking sharp in his suit but relaxed. There was an ease about him, a quiet confidence that was nothing like the stiff, overthinking guy who used to triple-check his tie in our wedding photos, agonizing over every minute detail. Alara was wearing this flowy vintage dress, her hair all messy pretty with dried flowers woven through it, a bohemian spirit I used to deem unconventional for a formal wedding. The old Ethan would have stressed about it, fretted over the deviation from the norm. This Ethan? He looked at her like she was the only person in the room, his eyes full of adoration and pride. During the ceremony, I watched him squeeze her hand when Chloe and Owen said their vows. No tears, no nervous fidgeting, just this quiet, steady confidence I'd never seen before, a deep understanding reflected in his eyes. He gave a toast at the reception, and I braced myself. I waited for the index cards to come out, for the carefully rehearsed speech with statistical references about lasting marriages, perhaps a PowerPoint slide hidden somewhere. Instead, he stood up, no notes, and spoke from the heart, about love and growth, about finding your authentic self, about the quiet strength of unwavering kindness. People actually laughed at his jokes, not polite chuckles, but real, genuine laughter that filled the room. Ilara watched him with this proud little smile, not even a hint of embarrassment or wish for him to be different. She truly saw him, and she loved what she saw. I ended up dancing with this guy, Chad, one of the other groomsmen. Tall, muscular, super confident, exactly the type I used to wish Ethan would be. He spent the whole time talking about his CrossFit routine and how most women can't handle a real alpha male. His words grated on me, a jarring echo of my past self. I caught Ethan's eye across the dance floor while Chad was mid-brag, flexing his biceps for emphasis. And for a split second, we shared this look of understanding, a shared amusement at the absurdity of it all, that made me laugh and want to cry at the same time. Later, I overheard Alara and Ethan by the dessert table. She was teasing him about how he'd organized the cupcakes by color gradient without even realizing it, a subconscious act of his ingrained meticulousness. Instead of getting defensive or apologizing like he would have with me, he just pulled her close, a playful grin on his face, and said, "You love my organized chaos." And she did. She genuinely, truly did. That's when it really sank in, a crushing weight of clarity. I'd spent our entire marriage trying to turn Ethan into someone else's version of a real man, into the kind of man I thought I needed, the kind of man society seemed to idolize. But all along, he was actually becoming one, simply by being himself, by embracing his own unique strengths. All that attention to detail I mocked? He turned it into art. The sensitivity I thought made him weak? It made him emotionally intelligent enough to work through his issues and grow. The carefulness I mistook for cowardice? It was actually thoughtfulness, a deep desire to do things well, to avoid unnecessary risks, to consider others. I watched them leave the reception early. Not because Ethan was overwhelmed by the social interaction like he used to be, needing to retreat from the sensory overload, but because they were teaching a couple's pottery class the next morning. They looked so natural together, so comfortable in their own skins, in each other's presence. No one trying to change anyone else. No one settling or wishing for something different. Just two people, authentically themselves, finding joy and acceptance in one another. You know what the worst part is? Ethan didn't get a better woman. He became a better person while I stayed exactly the same. Still judging, still wanting things to be different, still not understanding that being a real man has nothing to do with dominance or aggression or never showing emotion. All those things I used to hate about him, they were never the problem. I was. And now I get to watch him be happy with someone who appreciates all the things I was too shallow, too rigid, too consumed by stereotypes to value. While I'm here, dancing with guys like Chad, still searching for something external to define me, and finally understanding, with a bitter clarity, what I threw away. I used to tell everyone I married Ethan because real men weren't available. Turns out, I had a real man all along. I was just too busy looking for a stereotype to notice. The ochre wall, once a symbol of his blandness in my eyes, now stood for something else entirely. A quiet strength, a steadfast spirit, a beautiful, unique masterpiece that I was too blind to see.